Hi, and welcome to this series where I'm going through IT management approaches, models, methodologies, activities, and practices. I'll be giving you the main headline points, the base foundation you need to know about. I'll also be discussing some of my real world applications of these activities and practices in different organisations. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like, and click the bell for those updates. Okay, so let's get to it. Today, I'm going to be covering off the key concepts in SIAM, so Service Integration and Management. We've already covered off the SIAM layers, SIAM structures, and SIAM drivers in previous videos, so do please check those out. This video is going to dig a little deeper into the SIAM roadmap. Okay, so when I say roadmap, what do I mean? What does that mean exactly? Well, it's the stages and the various activities that you would go through to take a customer along the journey into the SIAM ecosystem. So you're bringing your customer into the SIAM model, you're creating, you're transforming. It's got 4 stages to it, and there's various elements that you work through it. Those 4 stages are discovery and strategy, which is, we'll focus on this in a bit more detail in a moment, plan and build, implement, run and improve. The plan and build, implement, run, improve, I'll do videos at a later date. This is about the discovery and strategy at the moment. And then within each one of those stages, you've got objectives, you've got triggers, there's inputs, activities, and outputs. Okay, so let's dig a little deeper on discovery and strategy. So as a headline statement around this area, think as is state, think due diligence, think you're putting the plan forward here, you're analysing the customer's organisation, you're looking at the as is situation. What is the current situation? You're thinking through, you're putting together a plan, a strategy, and you're looking to initiate a program, a transition program. It'll enable the customer to be able to confirm whether SIAM is the right thing for them in the first place, the right approach, what they're looking to get out of it, what those risks are. It'll talk around a strategy for sourcing. You'll also be looking at existing service providers. Perhaps there's going to be some service providers that are doing a good job and can be retained. Perhaps there's some others that maybe are not doing so much of a good job and that they're not going to be suitable in the ecosystem going forward. So maybe they need to be retired or new ones need to be put in. He'll also consider the skills and the resources that you're going to need for this transition. But then not only that, the transition and then the run of that, the ongoing operation of a SIAM ecosystem. So the discovery and strategy phase is a critical element. It's one of those areas where you're starting to look at how mature is the customer, how ready is it, and you're going to find out different organizations, different customers are in different states of readiness. So you may have an example of a customer where they've got quite a mature and capable supplier management activity, and it's well established and there's a good level of maturity there. There's going to be others that perhaps it's there but it's not as good as it could be, it's not really mature. And then you're going to have other organizations where it just doesn't exist in the first place. You need to create it from scratch. The outputs of this stage, and I will cover this in a subsequent video, the output from the discovery and strategy, you then refine them, you expand on them, you develop them, you add a bit more context and a bit more detail into it, and that's the plan and build stage. But at this stage we're talking discovery and strategy. We're talking what is the current situation, let's do the due diligence element. What typically tends to happen is you go through your discovery and strategy phase, and then as you go into your plan and build phase, it may be that you need to dip back into the discovery and the strategy phase again, just to make sure. You may need to refine it. There may be a bit of an iterative type type review needed, and just add a bit more context to it. The various activities you go through in the roadmap, it's not so much a tick list, a checklist that you have to go through and you must do it by the letter, and that once you've completed each one you must put a big tick next to it, or you know, it's not sort of a checklist fashion type approach. However, saying that, it is a proven way, it is an optimized and recommended way to go about delivering a SIAM ecosystem. So while we'll talk through various stages and phases and activities and so on and so forth, this is a recommended, optimized and a proven way of doing it, but it's not a checklist. It's not necessary that you have to go through and stick a tick next to each item. It's clearly dependent on the customer as well. So you're going to have different customers at different levels of maturity, or different environments, different sectors. Governance plays a part in it. Perhaps the customer's in a regulated environment, or there's some state laws or some corporate laws that need to be taken into account, or corporate governance. Drivers are going to be different as well across different organizations. Why are they doing it? And timescales plays a part in it as well. So in terms of the discovery and strategy, think this is about spinning up a project. It's not a do it as well as your BAU and your day-to-day job. This is a project. This phase is about what is the as-is state, what is it as of now, how's it work, due diligence. So think about capability, maturity levels of the customer, and then you're also looking to see what else is out there in terms of the SI and the SP perspective. So this phase, it initiates that project. It's a transformation project, and you're starting to put forward strategies. You're mapping the as-is position with the customer, and it helps an organization work out what does it want to retain in-house. More on that in a minute in terms of retained capability. Are there some elements that needs to be, perhaps they have to be retained in-house, or perhaps there's a preference for certain elements to stay in-house. Also, it gives you the opportunity to think about skill sets and resourcing levels. Maybe there's going to be an additional requirement there. Perhaps you're going to have to go out externally and resource as well. But the objectives of this stage, so as a quick reminder, within each 4 stages, we're talking discovery and strategy. There are objectives, there are triggers, there are inputs, there are activities, and there are outputs. So if we think about the objectives here, the objectives for the discovery and strategy stage is about, you are establishing a transition project. You're putting in place the framework for governance. You're starting to get an outline model for the SIAM ecosystem and the various services. You're starting to get this strategy together. It's very much a due diligence activity. What is the as-is current state of the organization? And you're looking at the whole area when it comes to what is the current state, what's the as-is state. You're taking everything into account. You're thinking through processing, you're thinking through tools, you're thinking through the current service providers that are in place. You're looking at internal service providers and external service providers. You're looking at skill levels. You're looking at services that are being delivered. And then the other objective of the discovery and strategy phase is around, you're taking a look out there into the marketplace. What's out there? Are there any service integrators? Are there any service providers that might be able to help with this area? So it's a bit of a look-see. You're assessing the marketplace. The next step, so after you've worked through the objectives, you go into a trigger phase. So I've covered drivers in another video, and I do encourage you to go and have a look at that, because there's a lot more detail there that I can cover in sort of better detail. But as a summary, each organization, each customer is going to have a different driver. Why are they doing it? What's the desire? Why has this come about? And you're using these drivers to create the business case. Quick refresher, there are generic drivers in SIAM and they're split into 5 areas. You've got service satisfaction, service and sourcing landscape, operational efficiencies, external drivers and commercial drivers. And then we fall into the inputs area. So this area, you need to think around governance. Perhaps there's some governance standards or some IT standards or some corporate standards or perhaps enterprise standards. They may fall into categories such as regulatory or legislative requirements. So let's say Sarbanes-Oxley for the sake of argument, if you're in a financial world, or perhaps if your customers in the health world, there may be some HIPAA regulation in terms of state policies or public sector or governance type areas that you need to consider. So really think through those governance standards. Perhaps there's current business procurement or other IT strategies in there. Maybe it's just there are some base business requirements or some limitations of some kind, or maybe the business requirements are we want better value. Maybe IT costs too much, it's unclear, it's all a bit smoke and mirrors. We want better governance, we want better assurance. Maybe there's a contractual or a complexity error in there that you look at it and go, this is just too complex, it doesn't need to be that complex. Or maybe it's just not joined up together. Maybe there's an integration management element that you would look at and say, this is not joined up, it's not flowing, it's all a bit kind of hit and miss. Perhaps those business requirements sometimes can be just not the right mix of service providers. Then when the other input into this discovery and strategy stages around what's the structure, how are the processes, how are the products, how are the practices when it comes to maturity level. So look at the organization as a whole, look at those teams, the departments, individual processes. Do you have a mature incident management process? Do you have a mature change management process? Does there even exist a change management process? Looking at practices and resourcing and skill levels all fall into that as well. And then your service providers, perhaps some of those are already providing external sources, maybe they're internal sources, but either way, look at what's in place both from an internal agreement perspective as an internal service provider perhaps, but also external contracts as well. And then you're looking at the market. What are the market forces? What are the trends, particularly around technology here? Then when we look at activities, so from a discovery and strategy perspective, we've done objectives, we've done the triggers, we've done the inputs, and now we're looking at activities. So you've got 9 activities here. You've got establishing the project, define strategic objectives, define governance requirements and the high-level governance framework, define principles and policies for roles and responsibilities. You're mapping the existing services and the existing sourcing environment, assessing the organization's maturity levels and their capability levels over a whole range of different areas. You're looking at the marketplace, you're having a look, see what's around, what's available. Then you're defining the strategy for SIAM and the outline SIAM model as well, and then you're producing a outline case, an outline business case. So if we dig a little deeper into each one for a moment. So the first one around establishing the project. So think this is about, it's not a do it at the same time as your day job. It's not a BAU add-on activity. This is a project. Think PMO, think roles, think governance, risk management. What kind of approach do you want to take with this? Are you going to take a structured waterfall approach, or perhaps you're going to be more agile and it's going to be a little more iterative and incremental? Defining strategic objectives, think long-term goals, drivers, business case, governance frameworks, sourcing models, roles and responsibilities. The defining governance requirements and the high-level governance framework. Think along the line of the governance framework that still allows the customer to have that level of authority over the ecosystem. So a really good case in point here would be if you are in a SOX or a HIPAA regulated environment, or there's a formal governance standards, you need to think, how's this going to operate? Segregation of duties is a great way of doing that. Think through risk, think through contract, think through performance management approaches. And then sometimes things go wrong. How do you resolve things? If there's a dispute, if there's an issue of some kind, how do you resolve that? How's that dealt with fairly? Think governance boards. When we come to principles and policies for roles and responsibility, think headline principles at this stage. Think policies for roles and responsibility. It's not detailed at this stage, it's the headlines. Detail will come later on. Consider that segregation of duties again, the boundaries. Where does it start and where does it finish? Think about delegation of authority as well. When we look at the map, the existing services and the sourcing environment, really important to think a service hierarchy here. Understand what is the as-is situation, including the services, taking a holistic approach, an end-to-end approach here. Think around the services, think around the service providers, look, take into consideration contracts. Also, if there are existing service providers, how are they doing? What's their performance? Maybe there's some monthly service reports that can be looked through in terms of understanding, are they meeting all their SLAs? Are they doing continuous service improvement or continual improvement activities? Then what about the relationship as well? So is it a good relationship with a service provider, or is it just not working? As a relationship, it's a bad relationship. Clearly cost will come into that as well. Look at and try and spot duplication. So for example, it may be, as you're doing the service hierarchy, you may spot a number of service providers that perhaps are doing the same thing. So keep that to one side just for the moment. We'll talk more on that. But also, in terms of commitment levels, is there a mismatch in terms of commitments? So perhaps the customer's thinking their expectation is they're getting the gold level of service, but perhaps the service provider is charging them the bronze level of service. So there may be some kind of misalignment there. And obviously service providers that are costing a lot of money, or there's a high level of risk. Think through those. When we talk about an organization's maturity and their capability, address that from a process perspective, from an organization perspective, a practice perspective, and from a tooling perspective. And then as we get onto the strategy for SIAM and the outline SIAM model, as well as the final stage, which is around producing a business case, an outline business case. Basically, you're using all of the activity and all of the information and all of the outputs from the other activities I've just mentioned. We'll cover that in the next slide. But for the defining the strategy for SIAM and for the outline model and the outline business case, you're using everything that you've just completed above. So let's now look at the defining strategy for SIAM and the outline SIAM model in a little more detail and dig into that. So the strategy for SIAM, it's your vision. What are you looking to do here? It's the strategic objectives, the current maturity and the capability. So we've already mentioned about baselining processes and the organization as a whole, its maturity and its capability around practices and processes, and perhaps there's tooling in there as well, that there needs to be a capability assessment and a maturity assessment. Looking at the services and the sourcing environment, you're looking at the market analysis as well, the marketplace analysis, corporate governance, or perhaps regulatory governance or state requirements of some kind. The governance piece there maybe HIPPA or Sarbanes-Oxley, SOX type regulation, and then the structures as well. So you'd be looking at the SIAM structure and retained capabilities. So is an internal structure going to be better, or an external structure going to be better? What about a hybrid, perhaps a lead supplier? When we talk about retained capabilities again, so we need to take into account what are the capabilities the customer is going to retain. Is it going to be governance, oversight? Is it going to be business engagement, architectural practices, enterprise architecture, strategic type activities? What about procurement? What about enterprise risk? What about management of contract management? So that's where that proposed SIAM structure, including retained capabilities strategy for SIAM, comes in. And then also sourcing approaches, and then your justification. When we talk about the outline SIAM model, we're talking about the guiding principles, the policies, the governance, roles and responsibilities, outline roles and responsibilities, the process model, practices, the structural elements of the service, and what those services are as an outline. And maybe there's some service providers that are just not pulling their weight in this model, and there needs to be a plan, there needs to be some thought around how do we retire, how do we sunset some of these service providers. And then if we look at the business case for producing an outline business case, the activity there, it needs to include the strategy for SIAM, it needs to include the outline model, the as is state. So what is the state of the nation at the moment? How is it? Where are we now? Kind of statement. And then, as with a lot of business cases, okay, great. So if we do this, what are we going to get out of it? What are the benefits? Why would we do this? What are those expected benefits from SIAM? I've also done another balanced scorecard video that I would encourage you to watch as well, and that helps in terms of demonstrating the value of SIAM, which is certainly something worth looking at. The business case, you want to have the risks in there. What are the risks? What do we know? And then costs, like all business cases. What are the benefits? How much is it going to cost? What are the risks? And then a plan, a high level plan as to, is this a 6-month activity, a 12-month activity, a 5-year activity, some high level type of plan. And as with all business plans, it needs to be relevant to that particular or customer organization. Each organization are going to have their own sets of governance requirements, either regulatory or non-regulatory, or financial or health or state based regulation. And then finally, we're going to be talking about outputs. So we've talked about the objectives, the triggers, the inputs, the activities, and then the outputs. So what are the outputs when it comes to discovery and strategy? Well, you should have a transition project. You should have some strategic objectives. You'll understand the governance requirements and a high-level governance framework. You'll have your principles, your policies, and your roles and responsibilities defined. Not in finite detail, but you'll have them defined. You'll have a good understanding of how the existing environment works, both from a sourcing perspective and from a service perspective. You will have that mapped out, so you will know what is the current state of play. You'll have that mapped out and understood. You'll also have ideally a capability assessment or a maturity assessment completed. So you will have a good handle on what is the current rate when it comes to maturity and capability. You'll be aware of the market, what's out there, what service integrators are available, what service providers are available, what does the market look like. You'll have your approved outline business case at this point, and you'll have a strategy. You will then have your outline SIAM model. Just some final thoughts around when we talk about roles. When you're considering roles, consider roles such as SIAM Governance leads, SIAM Ops leads, process owners, and when considering governance board, consider your structural elements, your boards, your working groups, your forums, and those are working across the ecosystem, the decision-making bodies. They work at the strategic, the operational, and the tactical levels. And then consider governance board types, so exec steering, collaboration boards, architecture boards, CSI boards, InfoSec boards, CAB boards, change advisory boards. Okay, so that's it for the discovery and strategy stage. We've covered objectives, we've covered triggers, inputs, activities, and outputs. Thank you very much. Please do subscribe to my channel. There will be other videos coming, so please do check those out. Thank you.